Certainly. Let's dive deeper into the rich and complex world of Chapter 1, Content and Expression, and explore its many insights and provocations in greater detail. This chapter is a dense and rewarding text that lays the groundwork for Deleuze and Guattari's innovative approach to Kafka's work and to literature more broadly. At the heart of their argument is the concept of the rhizome, which they introduce as a metaphor for the non-hierarchical, interconnected nature of Kafka's writing. As they put it, we will enter then by any point whatsoever. None matters more than another, and no entrance is more privileged, even if it seems an impasse, a tight passage, a siphon. This idea of the rhizome is drawn from botany, where it refers to a sprawling subterranean stem system that sends out roots and shoots in all directions. For Deleuze and Guattari, this provides a powerful image for thinking about text not as linear, unified wholes, but as open-ended networks with multiple entry and exit points. The rhizome is just one of many concepts that Deleuze and Guattari introduce in this chapter, often drawing on sources from across the humanities and sciences. Another key term is the assemblage, which they use to describe the complex interplay of forces and elements that make up Kafka's literary machine. As they explain, a Kafka machine is thus constituted by contents and expressions that have been formalized to diverse degrees by unformed materials that enter into it and leave by passing through all possible states. This emphasis on the material, processual nature of literature is a radical departure from traditional approaches that treat the text as a static finished product to be interpreted. Indeed, one of the most striking aspects of Deleuze and Guattari's approach is their rejection of interpretation altogether. As they bluntly put it, we aren't even trying to interpret to say that this means that. Instead, they are interested in exploring how Kafka's texts function as machines that produce real effects in the world. This involves paying close attention to the various gears and components of the writing machine, such as the recurring motifs of the bent head, the straightened head, the portrait and sound. Deleuze and Guattari's analysis of these motifs is a masterclass in close reading, as they trace the subtle variations and permutations of each element across Kafka's oeuvre. For example, they note how the straightened head is often associated with a sudden burst of sound or music, as in the famous scene from The Metamorphoses, where Gregor is drawn out of his room by his sister's violin playing. At the same time, they are careful not to reduce these elements to fixed symbols or archetypes, insisting on their fluidity and transformative potential. This brings us to another central theme of the chapter, the idea of becoming. For Deleuze and Guattari, Kafka's human-animal transformations are not mere literary devices, but genuine processes of becoming that break down the boundaries between fixed identities. As they write, metamorphosis is the contrary of metaphor. There is no longer any proper sense or figurative sense, but only a distribution of states that is part of the range of the word. This means that when Gregor Samsa turns into an insect, it is not a metaphor for some pre-existing human condition, but a real becoming animal that reconfigures the very nature of the human and the animal. This idea of becoming is closely related to another key concept in Deleuze and Guattari's thought, that of desire. For them, desire is not a lack or a yearning for something missing, but a positive, productive force that flows through desiring machines. Kafka's texts are exemplary desiring machines, constantly connecting and reconnecting elements in new and unexpected ways. As they put it, desire evidently passes through these positions and states, or rather through all these lines. Desire is fundamentally polyvocal, and its polyvocality makes of it a single and unique desire that flows over everything. This flows into their critique of psychoanalysis, which they see as imposing a narrow Oedipal framework onto the wild proliferation of desire in Kafka's work. For Deleuze and Guattari, the Oedipus complex is not a universal structure, but a historically specific reterritorialization of desire that Kafka's writing machine constantly struggles to escape. This is why they are so critical of interpretations that reduce Kafka's work to a set of familial or psychological symbols, arguing instead for an experimental approach that follows the flows of desire wherever they may lead.
Ultimately, what emerges from this chapter is a vision of literature as a vital, transformative force that operates directly on the real. Kafka's writing is not a representation of some pre-existing reality, but a machine that actively produces new realities, new possibilities for thought and existence. This is what Deleuze and Guattari mean by a minor literature, not a literature of marginalized or oppressed groups, but a revolutionary mode of writing that undermines power structures from within the major language itself.
To unpack just one example of how they construct this argument, let's look at the role of sound in Kafka's work. They write, "What interests Kafka is a pure and intense sonorous material that is always connected to its own abolition, a deterritorialized musical sound, a cry that escapes signification, composition, song, words, a sonority that ruptures in order to break away from a chain that is still all too signifying." Here, sound is not just a literary device, but a material force that actively breaks down meaning and signification. It operates as a line of flight or escape from the constraints of language and representation. This is just one instance of how Deleuze and Guattari trace the complex machinations of Kafka's writing, showing how it mobilizes a whole array of forces and intensities to produce singular effects. Another striking example is their discussion of the portrait or photograph, which they see as a reterritorialization of desire that captures and immobilizes the flows of becoming. As they write, the photo of the parents in America, the portrait of the woman in fur in the Metamorphosis. There, an actual mother has a bent head, and an actual father wears a porter's uniform. Proliferation of photos and portraits in the trial, from Fräulein Bürstner's room to Titorelli's studio. In each case, the photograph operates as a kind of blocking device that interrupts the transformative potential of desire, fixing it into rigid poses and identities. But Kafka's writing machine is always finding ways to subvert and escape these blockages, often by introducing destabilizing elements like sound or movement. This is what Deleuze and Guattari mean when they speak of deterritorialization, the process by which fixed structures and meanings are constantly being broken down and reconfigured. As we can see, Chapter 1 is an incredibly rich and generative text that introduces many of the key ideas and methods that will shape the rest of Deleuze and Guattari's book. From the rhizome and the assemblage to becoming a minor literature, it lays out a bold, new vision of what literature can do and how we might approach it. At the same time, it also demands a lot from the reader, assuming a familiarity with a wide range of philosophical and theoretical sources, from Spinoza and Nietzsche to Freud and Marx. For those willing to put in the work, however, the rewards are immense. Deleuze and Guattari's reading of Kafka is not just a brilliant work of literary criticism, but a profound intervention into some of the most pressing questions of 20th century thought, from the nature of language and representation to the politics of desire and power. It challenges us to rethink our most basic assumptions about what texts are and how they operate, opening up new horizons for reading, writing, and thinking. So while Chapter 1 is just the beginning of this ambitious project, it already provides a thrilling glimpse of the radical possibilities that Deleuze and Guattari's approach unleashes. As they put it in one of the chapter's most stirring passages, writing has a double function: to translate everything into assemblages and to dismantle the assemblages. The two are the same thing. In other words, literature is not just a reflection of the world, but an active force in its transformation, a machine for breaking down old assemblages and creating new ones at the level of language, thought, and life itself. This is the great promise and provocation of Kafka, toward a minor literature, and Chapter 1 sets the stage for the revolutionary work to come.